in the Red Sea.
U.S. Navy SEALs discovering components of Iranian-made ballistic missiles on a boat off the coast of Somalia. This is the raid where 2 Navy SEALs went missing last week in the Atlantic Ocean.
CBS News has confirmed that hundreds of U.S. Special Forces are now in the Middle East as President Trump weighs next steps for...
The most dangerous cargo in the Strait of Hormuz was not oil. It was silence. Because when U.S. Navy SEALs and Marine raiders intercepted what intelligence officials described as an IRGC-linked arms shipment in Hormuz waters, the first question was not what they found on board. It was why Tehran let the ship sail in the first place. A vessel moving through one of the most watched choke points on Earth. American commandos already waiting. Iranian fast boats nearby. A U.S. destroyer over the horizon. And somewhere above it all, drones watching a corridor where almost 20% of the world's oil can be squeezed by a few miles of water. So who tipped off the Americans? Why did Iran's commanders stay quiet until the boarding was already over? And what happens if the next ship is not carrying weapons, but mines? Watch this closely, because Hormuz is not just a strait. It is a pressure valve. And when special operations forces board a ship there, the operation is never just about the ship. The map looks simple. Iran on one side, Oman and the UAE on the other. 30-something miles of water at its narrowest point. A commercial artery connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. But on a military map, the same waterway looks very different. Missile batteries hidden along the Iranian coast. IRGC Navy boats operating from Bandar Abbas. Drones moving out of Qeshm Island. U.S. Fifth Fleet assets based in Bahrain. American surveillance aircraft sweeping lanes that tankers, container ships, and naval vessels all have to share. And into that crowded board, one suspicious shipment enters. Not a carrier strike group. Not a bomber package. One ship. That is the first trap. Because everyone looks at the ship and asks, what was inside? The better question is, who was the cargo meant to reach? By the time the boarding team moved, the Americans had already made a decision that carried real risk. They were not stopping a smuggler in open ocean. They were operating in waters where a 10-minute mistake can become a regional war. The SEALs are built for this kind of violence in tight spaces. Ladders, hatches, steel corridors. Men with rifles appearing from darkness before the crew fully understands what is happening. Marine raiders bring something different. They are not just door kickers. They are trained for irregular warfare, reconnaissance, partner operations, and missions where the target is not only the enemy fighter but the network behind him. That pairing matters. Because a raid like this is not designed only to seize cargo. It is designed to seize evidence, serial numbers, guidance kits, radios, drone components, shipping documents, phone data. The dirty fingerprints of a supply chain. And that is where Tehran's problem begins. For years, the IRGC has mastered the art of almost war. Not peace, not open war, something in between. Small boats harassing tankers, drones launched by proxy forces, missiles assembled in pieces, moved through cutouts, denied by officials, and celebrated by state media only after someone else fires them. The system works because it creates distance. Distance between Tehran and the explosion. Distance between the general and the launcher. Distance between the shipment and the battlefield. But a boarding operation collapses distance. Suddenly, the chain is no longer theoretical. It is sitting in crates under fluorescent light while commandos photograph it piece by piece. And that is why this interception matters more than one cargo hold. Because in the Gulf, proof is ammunition. For Washington, the impossible situation was this: stop the flow without firing the first shot. Too weak, and Iran reads restraint as permission. Too aggressive, and the world blames America for turning the Strait of Hormuz into a war zone. That is why the method matters. No missile strike. No air raid. No burning wreck broadcast across Iranian television. Just a ship stopped, searched, documented, and controlled. Quiet force. The kind that looks small on the news and massive inside a military command center. But here is the part almost everyone misses. The IRGC does not need to beat the U.S. Navy ship for ship. It cannot. The U.S. Navy can bring destroyers, submarines, surveillance aircraft, electronic warfare, and special operations forces into the Gulf. Iran cannot match that in a blue water fight. So Iran does not play blue water chess. It plays choke point chess. It turns geography into a weapon. A few dozen fast boats can force a destroyer to track multiple threats at once. A handful of mines can send insurance rates through the ceiling. A drone strike does not have to sink a tanker. It only has to convince shipping firms that crews may die. That is the genius and danger of Hormuz. You do not have to close it forever. You only have to make the market believe it might close tomorrow. One ship becomes a message. One boarding becomes a warning. One crate of weapons becomes a diplomatic grenade. And now the Americans had one in their hands. At first, the raid looks like a tactical win. The team boards. The vessel is secured. The shipment is intercepted. The crew is separated and questioned. The cargo is catalogued. Clean. But in Hormuz, clean operations create dirty consequences, because Iran now has to answer a question it hates. Respond and risk escalation. Stay silent and look penetrated. There it is. The word Tehran fears more than intercepted. Penetrated. Someone knew the route. Someone knew the timing. Someone knew the cargo profile well enough to distinguish this vessel from the hundreds of legitimate ships moving through regional waters. That kind of intelligence does not appear by magic. It can come from satellites. It can come from signals intercepts. It can come from port data. It can come from a bribed official, a compromised logistics broker, a phone carried by the wrong man, or an allied intelligence service that watched the shipment before it ever touched the Gulf. But if you are sitting inside the IRGC, the exact source almost does not matter. The suspicion does. Because now every handler questions every captain. Every commander questions every planner. Every militia receiving weapons wonders whether its next shipment is already marked. That is how a raid spreads beyond the deck. It becomes paranoia. And paranoia slows networks down. This is the delayed reveal. The real target may not have been the cargo. It may have been the clock. If the shipment was bound for an Iranian-aligned group, every hour of delay matters. A drone unit waiting for guidance systems cannot launch on schedule. A missile team waiting for parts cannot assemble on schedule. A militia commander promised a new capability now has to explain why the crate never arrived. Weapons are not just objects. They are timelines. Break the timeline, and you may prevent the attack without ever showing the public what attack was prevented. That is the part that frustrates viewers who want dramatic proof. They want the photograph, the manifest, the villain's signature. But special operations often happen in the gray space before the proof is public. By the time the world sees the evidence, the real game has already moved. And this game has 3 players, not 2. America, Iran, and everyone else who depends on Hormuz but does not want to say so too loudly. China watches because Gulf energy still matters to its economy. India watches because its maritime routes run through the Arabian Sea. Saudi Arabia and the UAE watch because they know Iranian pressure does not stop at the waterline. Israel watches because an arms shipment intercepted near Hormuz may have been headed toward forces that eventually point rockets or drones west. And Russia watches because every U.S. asset tied down in the Gulf is an American asset not focused somewhere else. That is the wider board. The ship is only a square. Now ask the uncomfortable question. Why would Iran risk moving sensitive cargo through a corridor under heavy surveillance? The obvious answer is arrogance. The better answer is necessity. If land routes are watched, air routes are exposed, and proxy networks need resupply, the sea remains tempting. Commercial clutter is a shield. Hundreds of legitimate vessels create noise. Flags can change. Owners can hide behind shells. Cargo can be mislabeled. Containers can be stacked beneath legal goods. A modern arms shipment does not need to look like a pirate ship. It can look boring. That is the camouflage. Boring wins. Until it does not. Somewhere before the boarding, a pattern broke. Maybe the vessel's route did not match its declared destination. Maybe its transponder behavior raised flags. Maybe a known facilitator appeared in the paperwork. Maybe signals from the ship lined up with a network already under watch. Then the decision moved up the chain. Do you shadow it? Do you warn it? Do you let it pass and follow it to the receiver? Or do you take it now? That last option is the most dangerous because it burns the intelligence source. Once you board, the enemy knows you knew. So why do it? Because the cargo was urgent enough. That is the hidden message inside the raid. Washington was willing to reveal awareness in order to stop the shipment before it reached the next node. Which means someone believed the risk of letting it pass was greater than the risk of escalation. That should make everyone sit up. Because special operations forces are not casually inserted near Iran for theater. They are used when timing, evidence, and precision matter at the same time. But Tehran has its own clock. The IRGC cannot allow the perception that American forces can police Hormuz at will. So its response does not have to be immediate. It may not even be symmetrical. That is where the next 72 hours become dangerous. Not because Iran must launch a missile. Because Iran has options below that threshold. A swarm of fast boats shadows a tanker. A drone flies too close to a U.S. ship. A proxy fires at an American facility in Iraq or Syria. A commercial vessel with Israeli links is suddenly inspected. A mine warning appears through unofficial channels. None of these moves needs to start a war by itself. Together, they create heat. That is Iran's preferred language. Pressure without signature. Violence without confession. Escalation with a lawyer attached. And Washington knows it. So after the raid, the American posture is not victory. It is anticipation. Destroyers watch small craft. Aircraft watch coastlines. Intelligence teams watch message traffic. Diplomats call allies. Insurance markets quietly adjust. Shipping companies ask whether one more transit is worth the risk. And in Tehran, commanders ask a colder question. How much did the Americans learn? Because the crates matter. But the documents may matter more. A captured weapon system tells you what Iran is moving. A captured manifest tells you how. A captured phone tells you who. That is when an interdiction becomes a map. Names, numbers, ports, brokers, dates, recipients, routes. A single shipment can expose a corridor that took years to build. And now the IRGC has to assume pieces of that corridor are compromised. This is why the silence after the raid may be louder than any speech. If Tehran screams immediately, it validates the importance of the shipment. If it says nothing, it risks looking weak. If it retaliates too hard, it gives Washington justification to widen operations. So it waits. Silence. And that silence is not peace. It is calculation. Around the 15-minute mark of this crisis, the most dangerous thing is not what has happened. It is what both sides think they can get away with next. America may believe precise raids can choke weapons flows without triggering open war. Iran may believe harassment and proxy pressure can raise costs without inviting a decisive strike. Both can be right for a while. That is how wars begin in slow motion, not with one dramatic declaration. With a sequence of moves each side calls limited. A limited boarding, a limited retaliation, a limited drone flight, a limited seizure, a limited strike. Then one commander sees a radar track too late. One boat gets too close. One nervous crew fires. One missile locks onto the wrong silhouette in crowded water. And suddenly the world is not debating a seized shipment. It is watching oil prices, naval alerts, and emergency meetings. This is the full picture. The SEALs and Marine raiders did not simply intercept weapons. They forced Iran's shadow network into the open for a moment. They showed that the United States can still reach into the gray zone, touch the supply chain, and pull out evidence before the weapons disappear into proxy hands. But they also raised the price of the next move. Because every successful raid creates pressure to repeat it. And every repeated raid increases the chance that Iran decides one must be answered visibly. That is the strategic trap. Washington wants control without war. Tehran wants deterrence without defeat. The Strait of Hormuz punishes both illusions. It is too narrow for pride, too valuable for chaos, too crowded for perfect control. And now, after one intercepted shipment, every vessel moving through that water carries an invisible question with it. Is this cargo or bait? The next crisis may not begin with a missile launch. It may begin with another ship that looks ordinary, moving at ordinary speed, under an ordinary flag, through the most extraordinary waterway on Earth. And this time, the Americans may not be the only ones waiting.